a bulletin. Okay. So getting to our learning sponsors. Sue and A, Year of Learning, Sue and Ann Gerlich, in memory of Malcolm Pearl Mann and Philip Mann, and Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Beryl ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Yosef Mel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Chenya Rivka Bas Rosner, Bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, and in memory of family murdered in the Holocaust, Harav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah Bat Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Adia Bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam Bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel Bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. Shall assure her children and grandchildren, in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Yisrael ben Harav Akiva, Marcia Federbush and family, in memory of her husband, Dr. Uriel Paul Federbush, Uriel Pinchas ben Harav Shimon, Sharon and Fred Lisker, their family and many friends, in memory of her dear mom, Harriet Friedman Elbas Yaakov, Leslie and Gail Kaplan, in memory of their parents, Harry and Marjorie Sedale, Irving and Pearl Kaplan, friends of Avi Gidler, Avrameir ben Shimon and Martha Gidler, Charna Bas Yeshaya, friends of Toby Paris, Saratova Bat Yisrael Dov, friends of Malka Levi, Malka Bat Yosef, friends of Joe Wolf, Yosef ben Chaim, the many friends of Dr. Marvin Blush, Moshe Shalom ben Yitzchak Halevi. I also have a month of learning by Mendel and David Cheslow, in memory of her mother, Shosha Bat Ber Leib, and Carol and Josh Sanborn, in memory of her mother, Yita Bas Nachman Binyamin. A week of learning by Lenny Bahar, in memory of her husband, Yitzchak ben Menachem, by Jack Gilman, in memory of his father, Yitzchak ben Avram Chaim, Sharon and Michael Glass, in memory of her father, Shlomo ben Yosef HaKohen, Florence Griebler, in memory of her husband, Michael. We have a week of learning that's in honor of Baha Eugene and Cherna Kowalski for their granddaughter, Ricky Finer's graduation from NYU Silver School of Social Work. Today is June 1st. David and Harry and Ann Clar, in memory of his late wife, Sarah Fega Bas Moshe. And today also Robin and Zvi Karpel, in memory of her father, Leib ben Shlomo. May the Neshamas have an Aliyah, Crank Rafir, Velti Yeshiva Shem Atzliah, and L'chol B'nai Yisrael, a good Gaben Shtiar.
Amen.
Okay.
Amen.
Now, I get thrown off between the flying and, All right, so where are we?
Gimel
Mem, right?
Aleph.
51, right?
51A.
Okay.
Aleph.
What?
Yeah, 51.
Olive, yes. 51 Olive.
Yeah, right. Okay. That's right. So let's just take a moment to come back, get my head back on, if okay. The issue of the order of the avoda on Yom Kippur has become a major issue in this chapter, in this parak, focusing initially on the aspect of the Ketoret, then going into the question of what happens if with the par, the bull of the Kohen Gadol, and then some discussion of what happens if the Kohen Gadol is nifter. Can the substitute, so to speak, then come in, use the same items, either that the deceased Kohen Gadol had taken in terms of his handfuls, or the animal, right? So these are all the issues that I believe we've been touching on, okay? So what I'm going to do is pick up in a moment on 51A, okay? And we're going to see here that the Gemara is going to try to make some comparisons to clarify some of these issues, okay? So if I start from the bottom of 50 Amud B. Right? Mimai, midikatani chomer betmura, shatmura chala al baal mum kavua, ve'ena yotz'a lechulin legazez le'aved. Okay? Gemara was telling us then that is there this difference between a tmura, an exchange, or a substitute animal, right? Okay, and where at what point does the substitute animal apply, right? And then the Gemara picks up the Isagadatach Mai Zevach, Shem Zevach. Okay, we're talking about the fact that it's the general category of offerings. Okay, and at this point, maybe the example of a normal Tamura situation doesn't apply to our situation of the Kohen Gadol. Okay, and so as we come back now into our Amud, V'ha'ika b'chor u'ma'aser dechalin al ba'al mum kavua. So the Gemara says, well, wait a second, let's try another example. Say we have an example of another case. You're going to argue that the situation of the Par Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur is so unique. What about other unique offerings? How about the Bechor, a firstborn animal, or Maaser, a animal that is considered the 10th, the tithe, right? What happens then? Dechalina Baal Mum Kavua. That in those situations, okay, even if the animal has a permanent blemish, what happens? Ve'en yotzin lechulin legazez v'liavei. That it's still not permitted given their, I'm going to use the word initial sacred status, right? That you cannot take them, remove them from that status, okay, and make it them like any non-sacred, non-consecrated animal in order to shear the wool from them or to work them, things like that. El Hashem Zevach Lo Katani, says the Gemara. But the writer then cannot be teaching about general categories of offerings. Maishna, asks the Gemara. So what's unique here? What's so different about these statements? Tmura, Shem Tmura, Achati. Okay, that when we talk about a substitution of an animal, that's one category. Okay, in other words, you had a certain animal for something, fine. You've got to replace it with another animal of the same variety, perhaps, but particularly for the same purpose, right? But what happens? Zebach, Ika Bechor, Ve'ika Maaser. But with regards to other general categories of offerings, right? We've got an example of a firstborn. We've got an example of a tithed animal, okay? And they don't fall into the general offering categories. They still have their uniqueness, right? Because if an animal is normally considered a blemished animal, you wouldn't, it would lose its sacred status. That's not the case with these two categories of animals, right? So that's the point that the Gemara seems to try to make. L'Rav Sheshet, and coming back then to our earlier discussion, right? Adimokim la be'ilu shel Aharon lokma b'Pesach. When he made the effort to explain the text, Rav Sheshet, right? That he was not suggesting that it was the par of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, but rather he was saying, okay, it was a different animal, namely the animal that belonged to Aaron for his Pesach offering, Jedochet HaShabbat ve'et HaTumah, that in that case, that animal does put off, so to speak, override Shabbat or ritual impurity. V'oset mura the korban yachidhu. Okay, and this, therefore, doesn't that prove, at least according to Rav Sheshet, that that animal was not a korban tzibor, not a communal offering, but it was a private offering. Kasavar ein shochatin hapesach al hayachid. Why? Because we have a principle that tells us that one does not slaughter a Pesach offering primarily for just an individual. So the Gemara then says, V'nok me b'Pesach sheni. Well, how about then if we say, if you want to argue, Rav Sheshet, that that's the situation, what about the offering for Pesach sheni? Midache tuma? Does that particular offering also override any ritual impurity? Okay, is that the case? Because normally the Torah tells us what was done for the first Pesach should apply to the Korban Pesach Sheni. Okay. Now, do we get an answer? No, we do not. And so we'll have to see if the Gemara is going to come back and deal with this issue again. In the meantime, Gemara picks up a new theme. Amar le Rav Huna berei de Rav Yoshua le Rav. Excuse me. Rav Huna, son of Rav Yoshua, says the following to Rava. Vitana, he says, it was taught, namely in regards to what? Ma'ishna Pesach dekare le korban yachid. On what basis is it? So what's so unique about the korban that of this animal by Aaron on Pesach that would make it considered a individual offering? Umayshna chagiga dekari la korban sibor. And what makes it different than another offering, also on the same occasion, Pesach, the holiday offering or the peace offering for the festival, okay, that would make it a communal offering. Okay, one would think ordinarily that they would either both be communal offerings or not. Okay, imishum da'ate b'knufiyah. If you're going to say that the Korban Pesach, okay, is brought as part of a group, let's say. Knufiyah might be a multitude, an association, right? Pesach nami ate b'knufiyah. The Korban Pesach also, remember, people register for it and they eat it as a group. So shouldn't that therefore imply that it also has to be considered a Korban Sibor and not an individual offering, right? Ika Pesach Sheni, de lo ate b'knufiyah. But on the other hand, if you take the example of Pesach Sheni, where if the individual was unable, remember, or distant, or things like that, to offer it on time, okay, he would bring it on his own. And so therefore, clearly that would imply that the animal for Pesach Sheni could be considered a Korban Yachid, but not necessarily, right, the one for first Pesach, regular Pesach. Okay, so what happens, says the Gemara? Amar le, right? So Rav is going to respond. Im kain, yehei dochet Shabbat v'yeta tuma. If that's the case, then shouldn't then this korban, this offering on Pesach Sheni, also override Shabbat and also override issues of impurity? Amar le, Rav Huna now responds, right? And yes, Yaman da Amar Dache, and therefore it's like ones who say that it does override. Titania, as taught elsewhere in a Braita, Pesach Sheni dochet HaShabbat, ve'eno dochet HaTumah. Okay, that someone says in a Breita that the Korban for Pesach Sheni does override Shabbat, but it does not override ritual impurity. However, there's a machloket in this Breita where Rabbi Yehuda says, Omer, af dochet hatuma, that it also does override impurity. Mai tama de Tanakama. So the Gemara asks on this Breita, so what is the reasoning of Tanakama that he would say that it could be such a korban that it could be doche Shabbat, but not doche the Tumah? Amar lecha, he would tell you as follows: Mipnei tum'ah techito, v'yaseh b'tumah. Okay, you're going to say that this korban, okay, on Pesach regular, okay, since he didn't do it, and maybe he was impure at the time, okay, and now you're going to say that when it comes to Pesach Sheni, that he can do it in a status of impurity? Doesn't seem to make sense. And Rabbi Yehuda, Amar lecha. And what's Rabbi Yehuda's reasoning? Amar Kra. He'll cite a pasuk that tells us as follows: Kichol chukat haPesach. Okay, according to all the laws of the Pesach, right? Ya'asu oto. It shall be done. In other words, that basically is the pasuk by which we use the idea. Remember that aspects of Pesach Sheni should be the same as aspects of the first Pesach, right? And therefore, va'afilu b'tumah, and that would seem to imply that just as Korban Pesach Rishon is possible to be done, okay, with a status of tumah. In other words, if majority of the community is tameh, or the majority of the kohanim, we said, were tameh, because it said b'mo'ado, right? It implies it has to be done. Okay, does that apply also to the korban for Pesach Sheni? Va'afilu b'tumah. HaTorah hechazira alav la'asato b'tahara. Lo zacha ya'asena b'tumah. Okay, does this seem to apply, says the Rabbi Yehuda, that since the Torah reestablished, I'm going to say, that the offering on Korban, on Pesach Sheni, can be performed in a state of ritual purity, okay? Because it says, right, that the person who is impure at Pesach Rishon cannot bring it, cannot participate, okay? Therefore, lo zacha, he did not have the, let's call it merit, the opportunity to do so. Shall he then do it in a state of impurity? So, at this point, the Gemara wants to continue on the next Amud, right? And tell us as follows. V'tepokli da asher lo amar Rachman. So the Gemara now brings us the point of a new theme, and coming back then to this issue of the ownership of the animal, okay, which we said was Rabbi Eliezer's or Rabbi Elazar's question, okay? Does the substitute Kohen Gadol have to bring a new animal, right, for the bull of the deceased Kohen Gadol? And as he's citing, V'tepokli de asherlo, when it says it, in a sense, belongs to him, okay, according to the Torah, mishelo hu mevi. This seems to imply that that substitute Kohen must bring his own animal, okay, from his own property, to Tanya, because we have a Breita that's going to tell us as follows: Asher lo, when it says which belongs or which is his, Mishelo humevi velo mishel tzibur, that he must bring it from his own property and not from that of the community. Yechol lo yavi mishel tzibur. It's possible I might have thought to say that he can't bring it from the communal property. She'ein hatzibur mitkaprin bo. Why? Because in this situation, the community does not benefit from atonement for this animal. Aval yavi mishel echav hakohanim. But rather, we might say that in this situation, he is bringing this bull and its offering, not simply for himself, but for his colleagues, right? The other Kohanim. Shehare echav hakohanim mitkaprin bo. Okay. Why? Because the other Kohanim, who we saw were included only in the second vidui, the second confessional, when this animal was being slaughtered, right? They gained their atonement in that way. Talmud lomar asher lo. Nevertheless, however, the verse says, which belongs to him. In other words, it has to be his and no one else. Excuse me. Yechol lo yavi. Well, maybe I might think the following. Okay. That maybe if that's the case, that he doesn't have to bring this animal again that from the property that he shared with the other Kohanim. Maybe it strictly has to be his. Right? V'im hevi kasher. But if he brought it with shared property from the other Kohanim, it's still going to be valid. Tomad Lauma, again, the text tells us, Shuv Asher Lo, which is his. Shana HaKatuv Alav La'akev. And the fact that the text seems to repeat it, right, teaches it twice, tells us that it is clear that it's an emphasis that it has to be the property of the Kohen Gadol. And that is what is one of the things that would make it valid. Otherwise not. Gemara, however, doesn't like that proof and raises the following issue. Ula ta'amrich, and according to your line of thinking, to your reasoning, Echav HaKohanim, ilav dekanu begeve, hechi mechaper lahu. Okay, if they're not going to be included, if they don't have a share in this bull, okay, on what's their possibility of gaining atonement? Ela sha'ane be'gava, the Aharon, the Afkirei, Rachmana Gabe Echav HaKohanim. But rather the Torah makes it a little, I don't want to say unique, but I'll say ordinarily different in the fact that in this case, while the animal itself strictly belongs to the Kohen, to the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, nevertheless, okay, since they achieve atonement through it, it's as if it's partly theirs as well. Okay? Hacha gabe tmura. But here, if we're talking about substitution, nami shane be geza di Aharon da afkirei, Rachmana gabe echav hakohanim. So what about the fact then of this substitute animal? Okay, well, how does that fall in here? Okay, could we say then that only applies to him for an individual, or might it apply in this situation as well, again, for this animal that has, let's call it dual atonement value for himself and his fellow Kohanim? Okay, how about that? Does that mean that it would be inappropriate, ownerless for them. Okay, so maybe here you can't use that proof. Okay, that property that was the Kohen Gadol's is unique. Okay, so that ends our discussion on that topic. And we don't seem to come to a conclusion again, okay, on this issue of whether a substitute animal could be brought or whether the death of the Kohen Gadol, okay, and he had slaughtered perhaps the animal, and then the substitute has to come and do the rest. Right. So our new Mishnah, okay, as we continue now, and the Gemara, okay, on the rest of the Amud, are going to try to deal not with these, I don't want to say loose issues, but in a sense they are, okay, but go on to discuss another aspect of the Yom Kippur observance. Okay, remember that the Kohen Gadol seems to be going back and forth from outside to inside. Now, outside means he's doing some acts on the Mizbeach. Inside means he's got to bring, at least it would appear, the blood, the coal pan, okay, into the Heichal, and at some point even into the Kodesh Kedoshim, right? So our new Mishnah now talks about the following, okay? The best thing I can do to help us understand the Mishnah is, again, call to mind, if we have at hand a map, okay, a diagram of the Mishkan, of the Beis HaMikdash, and the fact that, remember, we have the Ulam, which is the anteroom, we'll call it. Then we have another, remember, I like to suggest it was like an upside down T, okay? And the next part is, we'll call the Heichal. That contained the incense altar towards the front in the middle. And then towards the two, if you want to call it, upper area, one side had the showbread table, one side had the candelabra. Then you had another partition, okay? Now that partition between the Heichal and the Kodesh Kedoshim in the first temple was a solid wall. In the second temple was only curtains, okay? So now as we go into our Mishnah, okay, what do we see? Matnitin, the new Mishnah tells us, Hayam mahalech b'Heichal, ad shemagia levein shtei haparachot, hamavdilot bein hakodesh uvein kodesh hakodeshim, ubeneihem amma. Okay. So our Mishnah is telling us Kohen Gadol would come into the Heichal, right? He would go up to a point where he now would be standing between the two curtains in the second temple, we said, and the amount of distance between him was about 1 amma, a cubit. Rabbi Yossi Omer, says Rabbi Yossi, Lo hayta sham ela parochet echat bilvad. Rabbi Yossi claims that there really was only one curtain there. Okay, that's his argument. Shenamar, trying to cite a pasuk that says, "V'hivdila haparochet lachem bein hakodesh uvein kodesh hakodeshim." Okay, citing a pasuk from Shmot, the end of Shmot, saying that there was a curtain, right, implying a single one, between the Kodesh, the sanctuary, the Heichal, and the Kodesh Kedoshim. Now, what's the problem with Rabbi Yossi's argument? The problem I saw was that if that was the pasuk, could it have applied only to the Mishkan and not to the Beis Hamikdash? Especially if we knew that this first Beis Hamikdash had an actual wall. Okay, so let's see what happens, what the Gemara tells us as we continue now. Says the Gemara, Shapir ka'amar laho Rabbi Yossi the Rabbanan. According to the Gemara, Rabbi Yossi said the right thing to the other rabbis. V'Rabbanan amrei lach, and the rabbis would then respond to him as follows: Hane mili b'mishkan. No, that pasuk only applies, as I raised the question, to the Mishkan itself. Aval b'mikdash sheni. But when it comes to the second temple, kevan delo have ama tarak tsim. Okay, however, in the second temple, okay, the implication is that they did not have a separation. Let's use that word. Taraksin being a Greek word, okay? Surprising that the rabbis would use it in this context, but it implies a barrier that is supposed to give designation between inside area and outside area. Okay? Almost like if you want to call it a gate or an entranceway or something like that. Okay?
What's the significance of the 1 cubit partition?
Oh, that's a good question. Let's see if the Gemara answers it. All right? Okay. Ubemikdash Rishon Hudahave. Right? In the first temple, there was a 1 cubit partition, says the Gemara. The istapka laho, the Rabbanan b'kedushate. Okay, and that was rabbis, however, were questionable about whether that was the sanctity of that space, of that 1 cubit space. Okay, if you had 2 curtains and a cubit in between, do you consider it part of the Kodshe Kedoshim, or do you consider it part of the Heichal? Right? That was the question. And the Gemara clearly tells us that. V'istapka laho l'Rabbanan b'kedushatei, I kilifnim, I kilachutz, v'avud shtei parachot. And therefore, okay, you didn't know for sure, right, which, if you want to say, side of the curtain, okay, that area was. And so therefore, because of that doubt, they had 2 curtains prepared. Okay. Now, Koren has an interesting comment here, right? And okay, because the wall in the first temple was actually a cubit thick, and that's why it suggests that without this wall, they used the curtains and made a distinction of 1 cubit. Let's see what the Gemara tells us. Now, perhaps the point is, if we're going to see it shortly, does that indicate something about where the blood had to be sprinkled? Do you sprinkle it on the first curtain? Do you sprinkle it on the second curtain? So a new Braita is brought. Tanu Rabbanan, says the Braita. Bein hamizbeach lemenorah hayam mahalech divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, so if the Kohen Gadol now was walking in, okay, he goes past the incense altar, and what point? At that point, where does he walk? Well, he actually has three options. Okay? He could walk directly between, right? After he walks past, let's say, the incense altar, he could walk between the showbread table and the menorah. He could walk outside the candelabra between it and the wall, or he can walk outside, in a sense, in the room, but between the showbread table and the wall, to get access to the curtains. So according to the Braita, when Kohen Gadol first walked in, right, he walked, okay, right, between the Mizbeach, between the altar, the inner altar, the incense altar, and the menorah. Okay, so that would mean he sort of walked on the south side of the building. Rabbi Meir Omer, Bein Shulchan LeMizbeach. Rabbi Meir disagrees and says, no, he walked more towards the northern side of the room, between the incense altar, right, and the showbread table. V'yesh omrim, and there are some that say, Bein Shulchan LeKotel, that actually walked in closer between the showbread table and the wall. There were about 2 amma there. Man yesh omrim, and who are the ones who the yesh omrim? Amar Rav Chisda, says Rav Chisda, Rabbi Yossi. That was the view of Rabbi Yossi. Da Amar, Pitcha b'tzafon kai, namely that the opening, claimed Rabbi Yossi, to get, let's say, between the two curtains was on the right, okay, in the northern side. However, what happens? The Rabbi Yehuda Amar Lacha. And Rabbi Yehuda, remember who said earlier in the Mishnah, okay? No, it was, right? Okay. No, Rabbi Yehuda said that he walked on the south side. Okay, so what is he going to say? Rabbi Yehuda Marlecha, Kitcha bidarom kai. Rabbi Yehuda is going to say that the opening between the two curtains was on the southern side. The Rabbi Meir, okay, and Rabbi Meir says, Kaman Sevirale. Who does Rabbi Meir hold? Does he hold like Rabbi Yehuda that the opening between the curtains to get was on the south side, or like Rabbi Yossi on the north side? Ik Rabbi Yehuda Sevirale. If Rabbi Meir is going to hold like Rabbi Yehuda, Ne'ol ke Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, then what happened was he would go in, right, from the south side, right? That would seem to be the case. That would be where the entrance is, right? Ik Rabbi Yossi Sevirale. If he held like Rabbi Yossi, Ne'ol ke Rabbi Yossi, then he would go in on the north side. That's where the opening would be. Okay. So
Rabbi, at this point, only the Kohen Gadol is there, right?
Right.
So they're trying to guess what the Kohen Gadol might have done, but nobody else saw it.
Exactly. All right. Not only that, but remember we said that they're not 100% sure, some of them, whether there was 2 curtains or even 1 curtain.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's all, what do you want to call it? Supposition, or you want to call it second guessing, or you want to call it, right? In any case, Le'olam ke Rabbi Yossi severely. The Gemara wants to suggest to us that Rabbi Meir held the same view of Rabbi Yossi. Va'amar lecha, and he would say, Shulchanot tzafon v'darom munachim Umifseka le shulchan v'lo mitayel le. Okay? That Rabbi Meir is going to hold like Rabbi Yossi. And what was his argument? He says, how were the table? There were additional tables besides the showbread table there in the room. And how were they arranged? He said they were arranged from north to south. Okay? Tzafon v'darom. Okay? And what happened? So in other words, they would block part of the entranceway, and that's why the Kohen Gadol would have to walk, so to speak, between the showbread table itself and the wall. Okay? Otherwise, he couldn't come in, right? That would be the point. Otherwise, it would be too narrow. V'ibayat ema, and if you want, I would say, le'olam mizrachu ma'arav munachim. But wait a second, what happens if we argue the opposite of these other tables? That they were arranged east to west. Okay? Umishum shchina lav orach. And in honor, and because of the honor due the Shechina, okay, it wouldn't be appropriate, l'me'el lehedya. We'll go over just a little bit, okay, to enter directly. In other words, the implication seems to be out of respect, you know, you would take a little bit more circuitous route to get into the Kodesh Kadoshim, all right? Rabbi Yossi amar lecha, and Rabbi Yossi would disagree and say, Chavivin Yisrael, shelo hitzrichan hakatuv l'shaliach. His argument would be the Jewish people are beloved by Hashem, and as a result, okay, there is no need for a representative, an agent, an angel, okay? In other words, that it's acceptable for the Kohen Gadol, representing the Jewish people, to walk directly, okay, and not have to do a circuitous route.
Meanwhile, he's carrying a quarter of the bull.
That's right. He's got in one hand, he's got the coal pan, and the other hand, he's got a spoon with incense, right? And remember, we've raised the question long before this. This Kohen Gadol is no young guy, right? And so aren't we concerned the fact that he's got to do all this other work, and it's a fast day, all of these other things. Okay? So just to go a little bit further, Rabbi Yehuda Nami, Ne'ol bein menorah lekotel. So Rabbi Yehuda says, well, if you're going to talk about having to require him to walk a circuitous route, not directly, maybe he should go on the south side between the candelabra and the wall there. Meshachrei ma'ane, says the answer, says the Gemara. No, that would dirty all his clothes, right? All the soot, right? From the lamp, from the candelabra, would get on his white garments, right? And they would darken his clothes, right? Amar Rabbi Natan, says Rabbi Natan then, Ama Traktzin lo hichriu bo chachamim ikilefnim ikilachutz. And Rabbi Natan now says, in regards to this one cubit partition between the two curtains, again, the Chachamim were not sure what its status was, whether it should be considered part of the Kodesh Kadoshim or part of the Hecham, right? And that's where we'll stop there. We'll pick up tomorrow with Ravina's answer, his challenge, okay? And at that point, we'll proceed to see what was there a decision made on that 1 cubit area and what was going to follow up from that, okay?
Welcome back stateside.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Have a good day.
Is Zev on? I don't think so, right?
No,
No, you didn't see him.
No, I guess he may still be, he hasn't finished Shiva, has he, right? So I guess, and he was not having people call, right?
Right.
Okay, all right. All right, everybody take care.
have a good day.
Okay, thank you.
Be
Welcome
well,
back.
everybody, all
Have
right?
a good day.